lot of people have been talking noise about the Big Red. When Raiola slings it, you get on your feet, and I want 4 quarters of smash mouth football!
Welcome, Husker fans. Thank you for tuning in to Big Red Radio, the Husker Talk Show. I am your host, as always, Caleb. Next to me is my co-host, Zach. Zach, how are you doing today?
Could be better.
Yeah.
The motto after the Indiana game was, after the Ohio State game, I think, was that we're a 5-3 team that had a fluke game against an Indiana team. We had a game we should have won that we lost against, I think, a good Illinois team. And we had a game that, maybe not should have won, but definitely could have won against one of the best teams in the country in Ohio State. And a game that, we just weren't ready for in the Indiana game. And I honestly didn't feel bad about our season. Then the UCLA game happens, right? It just looked abysmal in the first half. Looked like we could come back in the second half. The pick six really seemed to kill us. Getting stopped in the red zone a couple times definitely killed us. Then I went and looked. I started doing some digging. Once the Satterfield stuff, really started to catch some steam, did some digging. It turns out in the Matt Rule era, which is now, probably, 1.75 seasons.
Yeah.
Any game that the opponent scores more than 14 points, we lose. Which essentially means if you're not playing, perfect lights out defense, then you're going to lose that game.
Right.
I think that's also why we lose so many one-score games. I think that's the answer. Because, you're not going to have a 17-14 game anymore. It's just not going to happen. It's not how college football's played. If it's a one-score game, it's going to be, 35-28. It's going to be 35-31. It's going to be 24-27. It's going to be, things like that. And so you're going to have to win the games when, that other team scores 24 points. You're going to have to go out there and win it. And we have yet to do that. And so I still think, in a way, I kind of enjoy that our defense isn't the best. Obviously, I don't enjoy that they're not the best in the country. But I do think we keep Tony White for another year.
Sure.
No one's going to take him right now. Let's be real. He hasn't, been as consistent as people want to be. The only head coaching jobs he's going to get offered, he definitely doesn't want to take right now. It's going to be rebuilding jobs. It's going to be, places where coaches go to die kind of jobs. And so he doesn't want to be there right now. Where he wants to be is at Nebraska with a young defense outside of our 2 interior linemen and Isaac Gifford, and Tommy Hill. We have a very young defense that can go a long way. And when you look at a guy like Riley Van Poppel, who's redshirted, that's a guy that's gonna make some noise in the upcoming years. A lot of guys are going to make some noise in the upcoming years. And then, for an offensive coordinator, when you look at it, you're like, okay, I have Dylan Raiola, I have Ja'Cory Barney, I have Dante Dowdle, I have Gunnar Gatula, I have Carter Nelson. There's
you still have Thomas Fidone.
Thomas Fidone in there coming back.
Emmett Johnson still coming back.
Right, Emmett Johnson's still coming back. There's not a lack of talent by any means in there. Obviously, we're losing Isaiah Nair. and Jamal Banks, but you bring in Malachi Coleman, right? There's your deep threat. Probably need one more to kind of fill that.
Jalen Lloyd,
Lloyd's
more
still
playing
there.
time.
He is. He's not really a go up and get it kind of guy like
Right.
Malachi is. But that's what the transfer portal for, right? You can go up and get a guy out there. But there's a lot of pieces there that should attract, and a lot of money. Obviously, we have the money, we have the facilities. A lot of guys want to coach with Matt Rule. Matt Rule's a really good coach. I was gonna say, you didn't hire Matt Rule to beat Ohio State in year two. And that's not why you hired him. You didn't hire Matt Rule to beat this Indiana team in year two. You hired Matt Rule to, in year two, get 8 wins, which seems tough right now. It's gonna be tough. We gotta win out, obviously. 7 wins, 7-5. I'll take. It's not great.
I mean, at this point, you would jump up and down for 7-5.
Yeah. To win 2 of the last 3 would be big. I think it's doable though.
Sure. Yeah. And before we go any farther, I do want to hit on something you mentioned about Matt Rule and expectations, because I think it's swung back and forth, and when it swings back and forth, it swings so far back and forth. So when we win, Matt Rule is amazing. Matt Rule is building. Matt Rule is doing every single thing right. He's one of the best coaches in the country. And then when we lose, are we sure Matt Rule is the guy? Like, do we need to cut our losses right now? It's like both of those conversations are just crazy right now.
Right.
Matt Rule is definitely the guy. I mean, I know a lot of people are getting frustrated because of what Indiana's doing. It's a tough situation to compare to. Indiana has a lot of upperclassmen that came with Signetti from a 10-win JMU team that was really talented. It was a really talented JMU team. Got Curtis Rourke out of the transfer portal. We've seen, since the transfer portal has become a thing, it's tough to evaluate quarterbacks in the transfer portal. Signetti did it right, and he got the right guy, and that looks good right now. I'm not saying it can't be, but let's wait and see if what Signetti did this year is sustainable going forward. Because the way Matt Rule is building, he wants it to be sustainable year in, year out. Hypothetically, would you be surprised? I mean, I would be surprised if it went this far, but would you be surprised if next year Indiana is 6-6 and
no, not at all.
Have a lot of troubles and stuff like that?
Indiana reminds me a lot of TCU.
Mm-hmm. I think they're better than TCU. I think they're better coached. I think they have a better defense, and I think they are recruiting well. You can see some of their recruits hopping on now. Signetti's a hard-nosed guy. He knows what he wants. He knows what he's looking for. TCU was just so random, which Indiana seems on paper to be random. TCU is also winning close games week in and week out. Indiana's killing teams. So I don't think they're going to swing back like TCU did and miss a bowl game. But I would not be surprised if Indiana was 7-5, 8-4 next year, just because they have so many upperclassmen on this team, and when they leave, it's going to be a little bit of an adjustment period. Or even, I wouldn't be surprised if Signetti left this year, took another job. I mean, he's good enough. Obviously, he's shown that he can do it at a high level. Is Indiana going to match? Let's say the USC job comes open, and they offer Signetti $9.5 million. Is Indiana going to match $9.5 million for a football team that's had one successful year in the past 10 years? I know they were successful during COVID too, but like, is Indiana really going to put the resources out like that? Like, I have a hard time believing that. Maybe they do. I don't know. With the new TV money coming in, maybe they do match that. But this isn't about Indiana. What I'm trying to say is Matt Rule's catching a lot of flack for the way he's doing things, and this is the way he's always done things, and he's always been successful doing it. We knew what we were getting into signing up for it. So just because other people are doing it differently and other people may be having more success now, I think it's unfair to Matt Rule to expect that from him when we knew what was going to happen with him coming in.
Yeah, I think there's some decisions that maybe he made it as far as, hiring some of the coaches that maybe shouldn't have been made, right? Like,
Right.
for example, I knew, right, when Satterfield got hired, it didn't. When Tony White got hired, I mean, it looked great. I mean,
Right.
it looked, on paper, like a lot of people could actually see like what is happening. They actually saw this happening, right, which was big. When Satterfield got hired, no one really saw this happening, but people kind of saw like this isn't
There's
a great
questions.
hire.
Right.
The fact that South Carolina was happy when he left, right? Um, there was guys in the offensive coordinator field available. Eric Bieniemy, one of them. I mean,
Yeah, I mean that's tough to do because who knows
I understand.
what
Obviously,
who would have said yes.
I'm not saying should have hired Eric Bieniemy.
And I don't even think I truly don't think Satterfield was. There's been reports that Satterfield wasn't really Matt Rule's first choice. Not saying he
Right.
wasn't happy with it, but there was other people out there, and it ended up he wanted a guy that he's familiar with, and he wanted a guy to build the culture with, and he just chose a guy that's never truly had a good offense. His best offense has been his last year at South Carolina when the last 4 games they went crazy. And now
Right.
it's coming out that maybe they had the other team signs. So it's like just a flash in the pan. Satterfield gets hired. Last year was tough to evaluate because we had all the quarterback issues, the turnover issues. This year it's just the writing's on the wall, I think. And that's kind of what we're going to get into with our next point. Obviously, Dana Holgorsen got hired today as an offensive consultant or offensive
Analyst.
analyst. Yeah. So, talking about Dana Holgorsen, a lot of people have a lot of questions, rightfully so, just because we have no idea what's going to happen with this. Is Holgorsen the next OC? Is Holgorsen going to call plays? Here's what I think. I think Dana Holgorsen is going to do exactly what Matt Rule told us that he's going to do. Matt Rule said in his press conference he's going to bring in people that he trusts to look things over and give a fresh set of eyes to what's going on offense. Maybe it is, you know, the play calling, the game planning is just not right. Like there just needs to be better game planning. These guys need to get more involved. I don't think Dana Holgorsen is going to call plays this year. That makes no sense to me.
Right.
He hasn't been with the program. He's been a defensive analyst at TCU all year. I think he took the last couple of weeks. I think he left a couple weeks ago, but this is a guy that isn't as familiar with the program as a guy like Glenn Thomas or a guy like Marcus Satterfield is. So even if we do fire Marcus Satterfield, depending on what they see when they go over the film, if we fire him this week, Dana Holgorsen's not going to be calling plays next week. It's going to be Glenn Thomas, or it's going to be Garrett McGuire, or it's going to be a different offensive staff member. It's not going to be Dana Holgorsen. He doesn't know the playbook. He doesn't know the players. He doesn't have all that stuff already internalized. I'm not saying Dana Holgorsen isn't going to be the offensive coordinator in 2025, because honestly, if you ask me, that's probably the most likely scenario at this point. We heard that he was trying to get brought in earlier this year. Ended up not happening. Ended up hiring Glenn Thomas instead. I don't know about instead. There could have been a lot of things happening, but that's my take on it. I don't know if you take anything differently just based on this year alone. What his role is going to be, I think it's going to be more of the consultant type, like maybe change, not even necessarily change anything, just like letting them know his ideas. Maybe he does change a few things. He's been a head coach before. I don't think he's just going to come in and take a back seat to an offense that's struggling. I think he knows that he's being brought in for a reason. So I think he's going to voice his opinion, but I don't think he's going to take over the room all of a sudden.
Yeah, I think he's going to be kind of the way I like to explain it is like a bug in the ear kind of guy. So, whether he's on the field, in the box, whatever, Satterfield's still going to call the plays, but if it's 3rd and 6, and Horton sees something, he's going to be like, hey, Sat, here's what I'm seeing. This is what I'm thinking it. Maybe look here, right? It's a different interpretation because for Satterfield, he obviously knows, the writing on the wall as well. He knows that. He's been around this team all year when you do that, you kind of get stuck in a rhythm and you kind of get stuck in your ways naturally. To bring someone in, because let's be real, like, Matt Rule is not an offensive mind, right? If you had an offensive minded head coach, a guy like, if you look at the NFL, a guy like Andy Reid, for example, then if his offensive coordinator is struggling, you have another guy there to kind of help him out. When Satterfield starts struggling, I'm not saying Matt Rule can't sit there and help him out. I'm just saying he's not as qualified to do that. He's more qualified to, if Tony White's struggling, if, the offensive line is struggling, if the defensive line is struggling, he can really have a really good insight and opinion on that. Not as much as far as, calling plays and things. And so I just think it'll be good to have, like you said, another set of eyes, but also just another voice at the same time in there that has done it, that has worked in, offenses that have done really well. He knows, how to do it. It doesn't come down to creating 10 more explosive plays a game. It comes down to, instead of going 5 for 13 on third down, you go 9 for 13 on third down. And the next thing you know, you're winning games. It's actually as little as that. It comes down to, instead of 3rd and 8, you're looking at 3rd and 3. Instead of, you know what I mean? But instead of 4th and 5 and punting, you're looking at 4th and inches and you can run the ball. It's little things like that that are going to win you games, especially in the stretch. When you look at games like USC, games like Wisconsin, Iowa, these are going to be close games, right? None of these games are going to be games where we should walk in like Purdue and you can play like trash in the first half and, oh, don't worry, in the fourth quarter we'll still score 21 points. Or, games like UTEP, games like you and I, where it doesn't matter really how we play in the first half because you can always fix it and just come out and win the game. But it's also not games like Ohio State where you have to play a perfect game to go out there and win. It's not games like Indiana where you have to play a really good game to go out there and win the game. It's games where the little tiny things are going to matter here and there to go out and win the game. So that's why I think it's going to be big for him to come on the staff.
Yeah, and a lot of people are speculating that he's going to be the OC next year. And a lot of people are actually upset with that, which I question, because their reasoning is he's never done it in the Big Ten, right? He's never succeeded in the Big Ten. And I sent out a tweet today. Let me pull it up. Basically, every single good offense in the Big Ten has never been in the Big Ten before. So, yes, here it is. So before this year, Oregon, Chip Kelly, Kurt Signetti, Andy Kotelnicki, Lincoln Riley, and Jed Fish had never been successful in the Big Ten. Now they hold 6 of the top 7 offenses in the Big Ten and are combined 25-10 in conference play. And I know that record might be skewed a little bit because of Ohio State, but you're also looking at Oregon. Oregon's 9-0. Kurt Signetti, never been in the Big Ten. He's 9-0. He's leading an offense that's top in the country. So you can't get stuck in he's never done it in the Big Ten. People want to hire Paul Chryst, just because he's been successful in the Big Ten. He also had Jonathan Taylor and consistently one of the best offensive lines in the country. Like, not saying he wouldn't be good, but let's not just shove off Dana Holgorsen because he's never done it in the Big Ten. Because when he has done it, and people are also upset that he hasn't run the ball, we're 114th in yards per carry right now. Dana Holgorsen has never been worse than that. So it's like, how much worse could he get, honestly? And in terms of points per game, this is where he ranks in his years from 2007 to 2023. 12th, 9th, this is in the nation. 12th, 9th, 2nd, 3rd, 13th, 8th. Then he drops off a little bit at West Virginia, 71st, 39th, 35th. But still, Nebraska's 96th right now. 49th, 30th, 10th, 46th, 51st, 19th, 13th, 85th. Never worse than where Nebraska is right now at 96th. Yards per play, he has a 5th in the country, 8th in the country, 16th in the country. Never worse than where Nebraska's been. Yards per attempt, never worse than where Nebraska's at. It's just these things that people want, people expect. Like, people expect greatness. It's like Nebraska's not getting greatness right now. This guy, He's definitely not going to be worse, and he's viewed as one of the top offensive minds in the country when he was a head coach. And people are still looking at him as a head coach. I see Oklahoma State fans saying Dana Holgorsen could be our head coach right now, like being okay with that. So the fact that we brought him in an analyst role, yes, it may turn into an offensive coordinator role, I think is showing that Matt Rule is not okay with what's happening right now, and he's not going to hold on to these coordinators, even though he might be familiar with him. He's not going to hold on to them for too long. And my last point I wanted to make on Holgorsen, that's a positive for Raiola, who has, let's just say it, he's regressed throughout the year. He was amazing at the beginning of the year. He was amazing against Illinois. He was a Big Ten defense. And I think in the last, 5 games, he's thrown 1 touchdown, 9 picks, or something crazy like that. Dana Holgorsen has developed quarterbacks like Graham Harrell, who, yes, didn't work as an offensive coordinator, but broke records in college. Case Keenum, who I think before last year was the all-time passing leader in college football, still might be. Brandon Weeden, who was a first-round draft pick. Geno Smith, second-round draft pick. Will Grier, second-round draft pick. Clayton Tune, still in the NFL. Also, guys like Tank Dell, just last year, or just a couple years ago at Houston. He coached Kevin White at West Virginia, top 10 wide receiver pick. Russell Douglas, Carl Joseph, defensive players. So he's not just this one-dimensional quarterback guru. He's coached other players before. And the fact that people are upset about it, it just doesn't make sense to me. Like, what do you expect?
Yeah. The only reason, I'm not saying I am upset about it because I think this is a good hire. The only reason I wouldn't like what we're doing is if today Matt Rule is saying, Satterfield, you're going to finish it out, right? Matt Rule is the guy that will come out and tell you, I'm not going to fire someone in the middle of the season. It's not going to happen. Unless they are extraordinarily bad, they do something terrible. Right. I'm not going to fire him in the middle of the season. It messes up the locker room, messes up the team. So if he's sitting there saying right now, this guy will be our offensive coordinator in 2025, the only reason I don't like that is because you just don't know who's going to be out there in the offseason. The best way to compare it, going back to an NFL comparison, if you were desperately looking for something and close to the trade deadline, you grab something and you're like, that's who we're running with, right? For all of next year. Well, you don't know who's coming out in free agency. You don't know who's going to be available in the off season. You don't know any of this. And so as much as I like that, maybe look at, this is an option, right? This is probably, as far as we're concerned, this is probably our top option right now. But that doesn't mean we're not going to keep our ears open. And that doesn't mean we're not going to make calls in the offseason. Because think about Ohio State, with a guy like Chip Kelly. He was a head coach last year, and he left to go to an OC role. You look, right. If Nebraska goes out and beats like USC, right, and USC drops us and one more game, it's not unlikely that Lincoln Riley could look to move to an OC role. I don't know if that's, like, I'm not saying that's an exact person that we're going to go out and get, but it's just an example. You never know. I just want them to keep it. I just want them to keep their ears open and keep the phones rolling throughout the offseason, but also know that if we don't like anyone out there, we do have someone that is serviceable, someone that actually could be very, very good, and make our offense very, very good as well. It's not going to make we know it's not going to make our offense elite by any means. But like I said, with this defense, as long as we can keep teams, if we have a serviceable offense, we know we can keep really good teams under 24 points. Mm-hmm. We can win a lot of games doing that. And so I think that, as much as I like that we have an option, I'd like to keep the ears open as well.
And honestly, I think that's what's happening. I think I would be very surprised if Matt Rule has told Satterfield anything in the resemblance of, we already know you're not coming back next year. I think it's like, you vastly need to improve. But he knows that. Like, he said it in the press conference, like, anytime, like, Nebraska's averaging just over 18 points per game in the Big Ten this year. And he said, anytime you're averaging 18 points a game, you're going to be under fire. So he knows. Satterfield knows. Matt Rule doesn't have to tell him that his job's on the line. Like, Satterfield, if anything, this lights a fire under Satterfield. Satterfield gets in the film room more. Satterfield builds a better game plan. Maybe he takes help from Holgorsen. Maybe he takes help from elsewhere. I don't know. I don't think there's a negative here. People, you can say, like, maybe this causes a disconnect with Satterfield. It can't get worse. The offense can't get worse. It's playing so bad right now. So I'm not worried about it getting worse. I think this is, no matter what, going to be a net positive. And I do think that Dana Holgorsen, although not going to be the offensive coordinator before next year, probably will be on the top of the list. I think they're still going to look at other options as well. I think Matt Rule is a CEO type guy. He's a detail-oriented guy. He's going to go through the entire process. He's not going to rush a decision. Although he does trust Holgorsen, obviously. He's interviewed him twice. He's brought him in twice, tried to bring him in at the beginning of the year. He probably thinks he'd be a good hire. I think he's going to do his due diligence. I think he's going to go through all the things. So, also, Nebraska didn't just bring in Dana Holgorsen. They also brought in former defensive coordinator for Matt Rule, Phil Snow, who was the DC at Baylor, and he was also the DC at Temple. While he was at Baylor, he had the top defense in the Big 12. I think a lot of people speculated that Phil Snow was going to be the defensive coordinator at Nebraska when Matt Rule took the job. Maybe he was offered, maybe he wasn't. And then he went over to Carolina when Matt Rule did as well, was a defensive coordinator. Right now, he's Chicago Bears senior defensive analyst. They have a really good defense as well. Working in the NFL, it's never a negative. But in his past, obviously, he's worked with Matt Rule plenty. So bringing him in, I just think Tony White's job is safe. I don't think you have to worry about that at all.
Yeah, if we dig deeper into the offense, all right, we all know that I would say there's probably an 85% chance that Satterfield does not work, or Satterfield is not a Nebraska Cornhusker next year. I'd probably give that an 85% chance right now. I just think if you leave him on there one more year, you don't get Dylan Raiola's and Ja'Cory Barney's and Carter Nelson's and Malachi Coleman's all in the same year very often. I don't care where you are. In the state that Nebraska is in right now, you don't get that, right? And so you have to take advantage of that.
Yeah.
If you keep Satterfield on another year, you take the chance that you're wasting that. You can't take that chance, unfortunately. But I think we need to dig deeper as well. What are your thoughts on, say, Garrett McGuire, right? This receiver core, one of the biggest issues has been perimeter blocking. It seems like other teams can run a bubble screen and get 8 yards on us, but when we run a bubble screen, they're in our face as soon as we catch it. It seems like when other teams run a speed sweep, it's 5-6 yards, but when we run one, they're in our face as soon as we cross the line of scrimmage. Same with, like a simple out route, things like that. You also got to think there's been a lot of 50-50 balls that do I enjoy Dylan Raiola throwing that many 50-50 balls? I don't know. I'm kind of torn on it. I think he puts, for being a freshman, I think he puts the ball, he has elite ball placement. But we don't come down with more than 20% of them, so they're really 80-20 balls, and then that 80-20 is not falling in our favor. You also look at Donovan Raiola. It seemed like the offensive line was vastly improving for the start of the year. It did. When you look at, the Colorado game, I understand Colorado's defensive line is not very good. But, Dylan had all the time in the world back there. Purdue, he had all the time in the world. Besides overtime, Illinois didn't look bad. You even look at Ohio State this year. Dylan had good time against Ohio State, but then we look at UCLA. UCLA has, it's not an elite D line by any means, and yet we got smoked. I mean, we got owned. Indiana, we got owned. We could not run the ball. You have to look, deeper than this offensive coordinator stuff as well. So, what are your thoughts on the position coach here?
Yeah. So, in my mind, the only position coach, let's just say, in the coaching staff, I'd be worried about 3 positions. I'd be worried about Marcus Satterfield, who we've obviously talked about, Ed Foley, special teams. It has improved. Still missed a PAT last week. Still needs to get better. And then Garrett McGuire, the wide receivers. Wide receivers just haven't been good enough. And I think the wide receivers not being good enough has kind of trickled down to affect, Dylan and the amount of time he has. Because defenses are daring wide receivers to get open right now, and they're sending everybody on a blitz, and they're just manning up these wide receivers. So it's like the offensive line physically cannot block more people than they have. So if we have 5 offensive linemen and they send 8, what are we going to do? Our wide receivers can't get open. Usually when they blitz like that, what do? You throw a screen. Our wide receivers can't block. You throw a quick one when your wide receivers can get open. They can't get open. So it's like, I think the wide receivers are affecting that a lot. I think Dylan also holds onto the ball a little bit too long. It's a common freshman mistake. Obviously, we can't have that. I think that's going to get better. I'm not worried about that. I'm not worried about Donovan Riddle at all. I think he's done a really good job. I think the offensive line is improving. But yeah, so the only other one I would question would be wide receivers, special teams, and obviously Satterfield with the OC. I don't know if I'd fire everybody. A few weeks ago, I was pretty firm on Ed Foley being gone at the end of the year. I still think that's probably where it's headed. Marcus Satterfield, we've already talked about that. Garrett McGuire, that's tough. We know Matt Rule loves him. Maybe it's a different role. Maybe he goes down to an analyst. The way rules are now, you can have as many analysts as you want. So maybe he lets somebody else come in and coach the receivers for a little bit. Maybe he learns for a little bit. He's super young. I think I don't even know if he's in his 30s yet, or at least not very deep into his 30s. But yeah.
I'm not even sure Garrett McGuire is older than 25.
Oh, he's older than 25 for sure. He is Garrett McGuire. Oh, no, I can't find it. Oh, wow.
He's 25.
He's 25. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's insanely young.
Oh, absurd. It's absurd.
And, these receivers, Jamal Banks and Isaiah Nair, are pretty much just as old as he is. I think if he's 25 and they're 24, that's one recruiting class difference, and he's supposed to be the one coaching them. Don't love the decision-making in that point. He has a lot of potential. The way he talks, he loves football. He's very smart. I just don't know if that.
So, his dad is a long time.
His dad's a great head coach.
So I think he understands that he's not going to take it, to heart if he gets moved down to an analyst at the age of 25. I think he understands, maybe I'm not ready, right? I appreciate, everyone was super high on Garrett McGuire. I still love Garrett McGuire. I think he can be really, really good. Yeah. But I think he understands, maybe I do need to learn from someone, right? Maybe they do need to bring someone in. I need to learn from someone there. Ed Foley, the reason I think it's an issue with Ed Foley is because I know it's not the kicker now.
Right.
John Holt went off in the Ohio State game. It is the snapper. It is the holder.
Yeah. Just the whole process.
Right. I'm blanking on the kicking coach's name that used to kick for us.
Brett Maher.
Yes. Brett Maher has really nothing to do at the end of the day with the snapper and the holder. He can't teach that. He didn't do it. He can teach kicking the ball. It seems like he's doing a good job at teaching kicking the ball.
Right. John Holt can make kicks.
But the fact that we can't snap and we can't hold, it's – if you think about it, in that UCLA game, we score, right? It's 27-14. We score 21-27. We could score and kick an extra point to win it.
Right.
We miss an extra point. That is so crucial in the game. It's huge. Actually huge. because we scored, in overtime. A lot of things can happen in overtime, and it's massive. It's massive because you can't have that at all. And you got to get someone back in there. Some people talk about Bill Bush.
I just don't think it's happening at this point.
Yeah. Because he was he not?
He was a special team. No, he was a special teams coach in Scott Frost last year.
Right.
And then when Scott Frost got fired, he moved to, because Shenander also got fired. Or Shenander got fired first. Whichever one came first.
Shenander got fired first.
Because then Bill Bush came in as the DC. And that's why people were. And the defense was good. I don't know if Bill Bush is the right fit. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that, a lot of logistics behind it.
I don't think Bill Bush is a DC.
No, I'm not saying DC. I'm saying even as a special teams coach. I just don't know if it's like he's been here before. He was with the past staff. He wasn't retained. I just think there's a lot of things there that I don't know if I want to kick that down the line. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have. Obviously, we're going to do our preview of USC next week. We're not really going to do that here, although USC did just make a quarterback change, so that's very interesting. But yeah, so we're going to get into our picks of the weekend, our Bet the Mortgage picks, get a little bonus at the end of this episode. I don't know our record off the top of my head. We took such a big break because we had so many things going on, but I think we're still positive. I went 0-3 last week. I know that. I don't think we published any of our picks, but I went 0-3. But yeah, so I'll get into mine. My first one is Georgia -2.5 against Ole Miss. I think Georgia's obviously been playing not so great. Ole Miss has been playing better. I think Georgia's been playing better teams. I think Ole Miss is a soft team. I don't think their offense is as good as it looks all the time. I think they played in a horrible defense in Arkansas last week, and that's how Jackson Dart looked really good, threw for 5-6 touchdowns, I think. Georgia's defense is obviously going to be better. They're going to come out swinging. I think Carson Beck can't look worse than he did against Florida, so he's going to look a little bit better. I think Georgia wins this. I think they win it pretty comfortably too. So -2.5 is easy for me.
Yeah. My first one is Iowa -6. Now, I do get why Iowa is only -6 versus UCLA. It's at UCLA.
Mm-hmm.
2, it's a night game at UCLA. Or no.
I don't think it is, now that you mentioned that.
It is a night game for us. It starts at 8 o'clock.
Okay.
Which is kind of late. I mean, honestly, it's kind of late for a Big Ten team, especially on the road. And UCLA obviously coming off a huge win against Nebraska. Their quarterback looked great. Their D-line looked really good. Obviously, Iowa's had the quarterback issues.
UCLA's been hot.
It actually all falls into place for UCLA to come out and win this game. But if you look at Iowa's 3 of their last 4 games, now these all are home games, so you have to take that into consideration as well. They beat Wisconsin 42-10. They beat Northwestern 40-14, and they beat Washington 40-16. Out of those 3 teams, I think all 3 of those teams that they beat are either better or even with UCLA. With Wisconsin, I think is a better team than UCLA. Washington, I think is a better team than UCLA. And Northwestern, maybe a little bit below or even with UCLA. And they beat all those teams by much more than 6 points. They found something in Brendan Sullivan here. They found something in, Caleb Johnson here.
Yeah.
Their defense obviously is playing elite. I think, they have the best offensive coordinator in the country. And UCLA played against a rough Nebraska offense and almost lost.
Right.
At the end of the game. And so I think Iowa finds a way here to come out and put a beating on UCLA.
Yeah. So my next one is Texas Tech +3.5 against Colorado. I think Colorado's in a spot where they're rolling. They think they can't be beat. A lot of people think they can't be beat. Texas Tech is quietly putting on a really good season. They just knocked off Iowa State last week. and I think they come into is it in Colorado? I'm not exactly sure where it's at, but Colorado. You look at the teams Colorado's played. They beat UCF, who we thought was good at the time. They're not. Arizona, we thought was okay at the time. They're bad. They barely beat Baylor, who's not good. So they beat Cincinnati last week. That's their best win of the year. But other than that, like, yes, they're coming off a bye. Doesn't worry me a lot. Texas Tech might start a little slow. They're coming off of a emotional win against Iowa State, but I think Texas Tech should be favored in this game. So the fact that Colorado is getting 3.5, it's pretty easy for me to take Texas Tech.
Yeah, my next one is Iowa State -3 versus Kansas. So you just talked about Texas Tech being Iowa State. Is Iowa State a great team? No. Is Iowa State a pretty good team? Maybe. They lose to Texas Tech. They barely beat UCF. They haven't really put a beat down on anyone besides Baylor and Arkansas State. They beat North Dakota 21-3. They beat Iowa 20-19. They beat Houston 20-0. They beat West Virginia 28-16, UCF 38-35, and then lost to Texas Tech. Here's why I like this pick. Kansas is a terrible team. We sit here and we talk about how bad Nebraska's offense is. We don't even understand the level of bad that Kansas's offense is. Good thing about Nebraska, they have a really, really good defense. Unfortunately, Kansas does not have that, right? So all around, Kansas is just a bad team. 3 points, easy money here. Iowa State is mad right now. Everyone's saying that they're frauds. They're going to come out mad this week, and they're probably going to beat this Kansas team, which, by the way, it doesn't matter that it's at Kansas because Kansas doesn't have home games right now. If this game is in Kansas City, it's actually a neutral site game. Pretty close. It's probably 3 hours from Iowa State and
an hour
or so from Lawrence. And so, and let's be real, it's going to probably be 70 or 60-40 fans at this game. And Iowa State's a much better team than Kansas.
Yeah. So my last one is Oklahoma State +11 against TCU. I think these are really even teams. I know TCU has a great offense, and Chandler Morris is, I think, leading the country in passing yards right now. But I think Oklahoma State is still talented. They still have Ollie Gordon. Their defense, although it hasn't been great this year, I think is still talented enough. And 11 points for teams that I think are pretty identical is just crazy. So it's pretty simple for me, taking Oklahoma State +11.
Yeah, my next one is Army versus North Texas. Army -6. Army, I do think Army is legit. I think Army is a good team. Army will find a way to beat you down and run the ball, whether that's with their quarterback or their multitude of running backs. They will find a way. They also have a pretty solid defense. I understand they really don't have that many quality wins on the year. That's not their fault. When you look at North Texas, they lost to Tulane, who is a okay team. They lost to Memphis, who is everyone thought a really good team, and they beat Florida State, but it is a decent team. They barely beat Florida Atlantic. They got smoked by Texas Tech. Just no quality wins here to even have in the same conversation in football as Army. Plus, I think Army is, looking really hot, and they're trying to get really hot going into this Notre Dame game. Army hasn't really had a close game all year, one within a one score. I don't think that starts now. I think Army takes us by 21, maybe even 24 here.
Yeah. So that's all we have for this week. We will be back next week with our USC preview. Just wanted to get a quick reaction to everything that's happened because we haven't seen you in a couple weeks now, and a lot has happened. A lot has changed. So wanted to get this out, but we'll be back with our normal programming next week. Zach, you got anything else?
All I know is that every week we have filmed a preview. We win. Like
Really?
a legitimate preview.
Did we record? We didn't do Indiana?
No.
We did Illinois, didn't we?
Maybe.
Yeah, I think we definitely did Illinois.
Maybe
Because it was like 6 reasons Nebraska will beat Illinois.
But we didn't do one against Indiana. We didn't do one against Ohio State.
Yeah, so we have a good record when
we didn't do one against UCLA either. So
yeah, so we'll do a preview next week so Nebraska can win. But yeah, we'll see you guys then. Go Big Red.
If we die, we die! If we die, we die!